Everyone expected the Omega to be trampled by the bull, but she made the Alpha King fall into the dirt. The ground in Kessler Ridge shook before anyone saw the trucks. It was a Tuesday morning in early October, and the valley was doing what it always did at that hour, waking up slowly, reluctantly, in the way of places that have been tired for a long time. A woman at the gas station on Mill Road was refilling the paper napkin holder when the vibration moved through the floor beneath her feet. She looked up. The window above the register showed a stretch of main road, gray and ordinary under a flat sky, and then the trucks came around the bend, and suddenly, it was not ordinary at all. There were 6 of them, long, black, heavy, and moving, with the kind of certainty that belongs to things with no reason to hurry, because they already know where they are going. Painted on each door, in dark red letters, was a brand that everyone in Kessler Ridge had seen before, and nobody was glad to see again. A capital D inside a circle, surrounded by a simplified outline of a steer's head. The Dre mark. The woman at the gas station put down the napkins and stood still. 3 streets away, at the feed and grain supplier, the owner stepped outside when he heard the engine sounds multiply. He stood on the pavement and watched the convoy pass, and did not say a word. At the elementary school, a teacher who was setting up her classroom happened to look out the window at exactly the right moment. She watched the last truck disappear around the far corner, and then turned back to her children's drawings on the wall, and stood there for a few seconds, before she could concentrate on them again. Nobody in Kessler Ridge smiled when the Dre trucks arrived. Not out of unfriendliness, out of knowledge. A Dre arrival meant something was about to be taken, and everyone in the valley had seen enough of that to know it in their bones before a single word had been said. Mara Voss was loading hay bales at the east end of the stockyard when the sound reached her. She registered it, the low diesel rumble of heavy vehicles in number, and she set the bale down where it needed to go and straightened her back and looked toward the road. She could not see the trucks from where she was standing. She did not need to. She knew what that sound meant. She was 23 years old. She was lean in the way of people who work hard and do not eat more than they need, with dark hair pulled back in a low knot, and hands that showed the kind of regular use that cannot be concealed by anything. Her boots were old, scuffed past the point where polish would have helped. Her jacket was second-hand, a size too big across the shoulders, deep green, the kind of jacket that had seen 3 or 4 owners before her. She wore it like she wore everything else, without thinking about it, without apology, without the particular self-consciousness that people sometimes carry when they believe others are watching them. Pete Lund came jogging over from the far waterline, with wide eyes, and the expression of a man delivering news he considers important. "Callum Dre," he said, still slightly out of breath. "Himself. He's here." "I heard the trucks," Mara said. Pete waited for more. There was no more. "You're not concerned?" he said. She looked at him evenly. "I've been concerned for 18 months, she said. "Today it just becomes visible." He stared at her. She picked up another hay bale. Kessler Ridge was the kind of town that had been built for a bigger future than it had received. A century ago, it had been a trading center for the Highland cattle country, active, purposeful, with a market hall and 2 lumber operations, and a population that talked about expansion with the easy confidence of people who believe the world is moving in their direction. The market hall was gone. One of the lumber operations had closed in the 1980s, the other in 2003. The population, which had once touched 1,200, had settled in recent years at a number that could fit comfortably into a large gymnasium. What remained was the stockyard, a diner that served reliable food without pretension, a post office, a grocery store, a small hardware supplier, and about 400 people who stayed, because this was home. The land was what kept them. Not the buildings, not the main road, not the administrative fact of the town's name on a county map. The land, the actual soil and grass and fence lines, and the particular way the light came across the valley in the late afternoon, that was what could not be replaced. 6 families held the East Valley plots: the Crofts, the Lundquists, the Haydens, the Norths, the Brecks, and the Vosses. Their properties ran in a connected chain along the eastern edge of the valley, backed by the low hills, open to the morning sun. They had been there for generations. The oldest structures on the Croft land dated to 1903. The Voss farmhouse had been built by Mara's great-grandfather with lumber from the second mill. Callum Dre wanted all of it. He was 31 years old, the son and heir of Gerald Dre, whose family had built a cattle empire across the Highland country through 40 years of patient, precise, relentless acquisition. Gerald had stepped back from active operations 3 years ago. Callum had taken over the expansion strategy, and his record in that role was, from a business perspective, perfect. He had acquired land in 2 other towns in the region. Both acquisitions had followed the same pattern: inquiry, assessment, approach, community resistance, legal process, and then, eventually, inevitably, the Dre name on the deed. He checked into the Ridgeview Inn, Kessler Ridge's only lodging, at 12:30 on Tuesday afternoon. The woman at the front desk gave him his key and said she hoped he would find everything comfortable. He thanked her briefly and went upstairs without making small talk. In his room, he spread a folder of documents across the desk and read through them. He had read them before, multiple times, but he read them again. Property assessments, family financial histories that his research team had compiled quietly, boundary survey records, legal opinions on acquisition pathways. He read with the focused patience of someone who finds security in repetition, in knowing everything that can be known before taking a step. The Haydens had missed 3 loan payments. The Norths had refinanced twice in 5 years. The Brecks were elderly, and their children lived in other states. These were the soft points. His legal team had already outlined the approach. You start with the most financially vulnerable family, make a fair offer, fair enough that refusing it requires explanation. And once one sale happens, the remaining families feel the pressure of holding out. It was not a complicated strategy. It was simply thorough. He turned off the light and went to sleep without difficulty. Mara went home to the Voss farmhouse that evening to find her father, George, on the porch. He was 61 years old, and had the look of a man who had carried weight for long enough that the carrying had become invisible. Just the posture of his life, bent slightly at the edges, nothing dramatic. His hands rested in his lap without purpose. "They're here," he said when she came through the gate. "I know, Dad. I keep thinking about the letter we signed," he said. 2 years ago, the water access one. Your uncle said it was routine." Mara sat on the step below him and looked out across the yard, at the old fence that needed new posts, at the patch of garden her mother had planted in better years, at the dry brown grass holding the last of the afternoon warmth. "I've been looking at that letter," she said carefully. Was it a mistake? She did not answer immediately. She had been looking at that letter, and many other documents besides it, for 18 months. She had a folder under the loose floorboard in the hallway that held things she had not yet shown anyone. She had reasons for not showing anyone yet. "I don't know everything I need to know yet," she said, which was true. She was still working. George nodded slowly and did not press. He trusted her quietness. He had learned to. The town hall meeting was announced for Thursday evening, 3 days after the trucks rolled in. Gerald Bray, who had run the town council for 12 years, and had the steady, unexcitable quality of a man who has seen most things and intends to handle them properly, posted notices at the diner, the grocery store, and the post office. He sent written notifications to every household. The meeting would be at the community center. By 6 on Thursday evening, every folding chair was occupied, and people were standing along every wall. The metal chairs scraped the concrete floor when anyone moved, and there were small sounds all around the room. Coughs, the shifting of weight, the compressed sounds of people in a shared anxiety that no one was naming directly. At the front table sat Gerald Bray, Callum Dre, and 2 members of his legal team. A woman named Carol Finch with short, precise hair, and a man named Frank Holden, who had the particular kind of calm that comes from being paid very well to be calm in exactly these situations. They had a projector. They had charts. Frank Holden presented everything in smooth, measured language that made the acquisition sound not merely reasonable, but generous. He used words like equitable and sustainable and long-term community benefit. When people asked questions, and people did ask questions, he answered each one with patient, thorough detail that was somehow more discouraging than a flat refusal would have been. He made every challenge feel fully heard, and then gently redirected. He was, in the blunt technical sense of the word, exceptional at this. Ted Croft stood up from his chair in the 3rd row. He was 68 years old and had worked his land for 40 years, and he said, with the directness of a man who has run out of appetite for careful phrasing, "We have not agreed to sell, and we will not agree to sell, and no sum of money changes that." People in the room applauded. Frank Holden thanked him warmly and said the process would involve individual conversations with each family at their own pace, and that no family was under any obligation to make any decision before they felt fully comfortable. It was a perfect answer. It confirmed nothing and closed nothing, and Ted Croft sat back down with the unsatisfied look of someone who had swung at something that moved. Dorothy Lundquist, who was 70 and had more fire in her than most people half her age and all of her weight, stood up and addressed Callum Dre directly. She said, "This valley does not want you here." The applause was louder this time. Callum Dre nodded politely, as if acknowledging a comment about the weather. Frank Holden responded. Dorothy sat down. Carl Hayden said nothing. He sat with his arms folded and his jaw set and his eyes on the table. By 8:30, the energy in the room had dropped in the particular way that happens when a community realizes, slowly and against its own wishes, that it is losing. The questions had become shorter. People were shifting in their chairs. Frank Holden had answered everything, deflected everything, redirected everything. Gerald Bray looked at his notes for the closing procedure. "Any final comments before I close the floor for this session?" he said. From the back of the room, in a voice that was clear and level and completely without urgency, came the words, "I have something." People turned. A few looked mildly surprised. Some looked sympathetic in advance, which is the particular look reserved for someone you expect to be embarrassed and cannot protect. A woman near the middle whispered to the man beside her. He shook his head slightly. That was George's daughter, the quiet one, the stockyard girl. Mara walked to the front. She did not hurry. She set her clipboard on the edge of the table and turned to face the room. She pulled a folded piece of paper from the inside pocket of her jacket and opened it with both hands. "In 1962, she said, when the Dre family completed their first land purchase in this valley, they entered into a recorded covenant with Kessler Ridge County. That covenant placed a permanent usage restriction on the Eastern Valley parcel, which includes all 6 of the family plots under discussion this evening." She paused for exactly 1 second. The restriction prohibits the consolidation of those parcels under any single private ownership for purposes other than subsistence agriculture. The room went very quiet. This is a copy of that covenant. The original is in the county records office, under deed reference 1962-KR-447. She looked at the paper. "I pulled it 18 months ago. I have verified it against 3 independent sources. It has never been legally dissolved." She set the paper down. At the front table, Carol Finch leaned toward Frank Holden. Her lips moved near his ear. Frank Holden's face did not visibly change, but the quality of his stillness altered, from practiced calm to something else, something less comfortable. It was a very small difference, and Mara saw it clearly. Callum Dre looked at her for the first time that evening. She looked back at him. Her expression was the same expression she had been wearing all night. Present, attentive, without anything given away. "If this covenant is still in effect," she continued, turning to Gerald Bray, "then the proposed acquisition cannot proceed legally without a court-ordered dissolution, which would require a full public hearing and review by the state attorney's office." She picked up the document and held it toward him. "I'd like this entered into the meeting record." Gerald Bray looked at her. He reached out and took the paper. The room broke open. Not in anger, in something louder and more complicated than anger. The sound of people who had already closed themselves to the idea of winning, and were suddenly, unwillingly, being reopened. Ted Croft grabbed the arm of the man beside him. Dorothy Lundquist got to her feet. 3 conversations started at once. At the front table, Frank Holden placed both palms flat on the surface. He breathed in slowly through his nose. Callum Dre watched Mara Voss turn from the podium. She picked up her clipboard. She walked back through the crowd, which moved aside for her without her asking it to. She went out through the side door. The night air outside was cold and sharp. The voices from inside the community center rose and fell in overlapping waves behind her. She walked to her truck at the far end of the parking lot, got in, and sat in the dark for a moment. Her hands were trembling slightly against the steering wheel, not from fear, from the particular release of holding something very tight for a very long time, and finally letting it go. She put the key in the ignition. She started the engine. She drove home. The morning after the meeting came in gray and sharp, with frost on the fence posts, and the kind of silence that comes before a thing settles into its new shape. Mara was at the stockyard by 5:30. She fed the cattle, checked the water lines, and moved through the morning routines with the focused regularity that she had always found steadying, the work that did not change regardless of what happened elsewhere, that required only the body and a certain quality of presence. The animals did not care what had been said the night before. They needed food and water. She provided those things. That was enough. Pete Lund arrived at 7, stamping the frost off his boots at the gate. He looked at her with the expression she was going to be seeing a great deal in the coming days. That combination of astonishment and uncertainty, as if people had not fully decided yet whether what she had done was brave or reckless, and were waiting to see how the situation developed before they committed to a position. "People are talking," he said. "I expected they would be," she said. "Ted Croft called the county records office first thing. He wants to see the original document." "Good," she said. "He should." Pete was quiet for a moment, watching her move a water line. "Do you think it will actually work?" he asked. "The covenant." She gave the question the honest consideration it deserved. "I think it is legally real and currently in force," she said. "Whether the Dre legal team can find a way around it, that depends on things I don't fully control." She looked at him. "But it's real. That's not nothing." At the Ridgeview Inn, Callum Dre was awake before 6. He had slept, but not deeply. He sat at the small desk with the folder open, and reread the specific page that referenced the Eastern Valley parcels and their acquisition pathway. He had read this page perhaps 40 times in the past 3 months. The word covenant did not appear anywhere on it. His research team's file did not contain any reference to a recorded instrument from 1962, which meant either his team had missed it, or the instrument was buried in the county record in a way that a standard search would not surface. He picked up his phone and called Frank Holden. Frank arrived within 10 minutes, jacket slightly hurried, with his professional composure reassembled but not quite settled. He sat down across the desk. "I need to know how she found it," Callum said. "We're working on that," Frank said. "What I can tell you is that she filed a Freedom of Information request at the county level approximately 14 months ago. The records office confirmed it this morning when I called." 14 months ago, Callum said. "She has been building this for a long time," Frank said. Callum looked at the page in front of him. "What's the document's legal status?" "It's real," Frank said. "Our initial contact with the county confirms it's a valid recorded instrument. The question is enforceability after 60 years of subsequent land activity." He paused. "Our position would be that practical non-enforcement over 6 decades represents a kind of effective administrative abandonment. That argument is viable." "Viable," Callum repeated. Frank understood the tone. "It is not guaranteed," he said. By 9 that morning, Frank had called the county records office to request a copy of the covenant. By 10, Carol Finch had contacted Gerald Bray in writing, requesting that the document submitted the previous evening be removed from the meeting record, on the grounds that it had been submitted by a non-legal party. Gerald Bray read the request, set it aside, and sent back a reply, stating that the document had been submitted during an open public comment period, and was therefore part of the official record. He forwarded the Finch request to the county clerk's office without comment. Mara did not hear about the attempt to remove the document from the record until that evening, when Gerald called her himself to let her know it had failed, and to tell her, in the steady way he had of saying things that mattered, without dramatizing them, that the record stood. "Thank you for telling me," she said. "Thank you for what you brought last night," he said. He had been a town council moderator for 12 years, and he had sat through a great many meetings where nothing happened. He appreciated the exception. She had known, from the moment she unfolded that paper the night before, that there would be moves to counter her. She had planned for them. The document was in the meeting record. Her copies were under the floorboard and in her locker at the stockyard. The verification from the state archive was in the folder with the copies. Each layer of documentation supported the next. Taking one piece out would not collapse the rest. She was not unaware of the difficulty ahead. She understood that a valid document did not guarantee a favorable outcome. She understood that money could move things in directions that were technically legal, even when they were not entirely right. She had understood all of that for 18 months. She had built her case anyway. Her father was at the kitchen table when she came in that evening, the newspaper spread in front of him. He read slowly now, one finger following the line. A man at the diner told Pete that Callum's people made some comment about you at a business meeting earlier this week, he said without looking up. Something about inexperienced people misreading old records. She hung up her jacket. I expected something like that. It bothers you? She thought about it honestly. It tells me they don't have a strong counter-argument yet, she said. If they did, they would be making it instead of making comments about me. George folded the paper. His hands were big and still capable, even if they rested more than they used to. I keep thinking about that water access letter we signed, he said. Your uncle told us it was nothing. I know, she said. Was it nothing? I'm not sure yet, she said. I've been looking at it. I think there may be something in it that mattered, but I need to be certain before I say so. She sat down across from him. Dad, I'm going to file the covenant document with the State Land Rights Office. Formally, as a legal submission, in my own name. He looked at her. It means it becomes an active matter, she said. It means the state office has to respond to it. It takes it out of the meeting record and puts it into the legal process, where it has more weight. Is that what Dolores would do? He said. She blinked. Who is Dolores? I don't know, he said. I was asking if someone told you to do this. No one told me, she said. I figured it out from what I've been reading. She paused. I'll file next week. The morning she drove to the State Land Rights Office was a Thursday. She had typed her submission the night before, 4 pages in plain, factual language, corrected 4 typos she found in the final draft before printing it. She drove the 60 miles in the early morning, arrived when the office opened at 8, and handed the package to the woman at the reception counter. The cover letter, the submission, the copies of the covenant, the archive verification, the Freedom of Information reference numbers, the 3 cross-verified sources listed with their contact information. The woman at the counter looked at the documents. This is thorough, she said. I wanted them to have everything they needed, Mara said. She drove home on the valley road in the late morning, with the radio off and both hands on the wheel, and the particular feeling of someone who has done what could be done and is now waiting on things outside their reach. It was not a comfortable feeling, but it was cleaner than the alternative. Ted Croft came to the stockyard on Friday evening, just before end of shift, with Bea beside him. They stood in the yard while Mara washed up, and Ted said, I read the covenant at the county office. I sat with it for an hour. What did you think? She said. I think you read it right, he said. Bea said, what do you need from us? I don't need anything yet, Mara said. But if the state office opens a formal review, it will help to have the families present together. When and if that time comes. We'll be there, Bea said. It was a complete sentence. It required no elaboration. Ted said, why did you carry this alone for 18 months? Why not bring it to the community sooner? She looked at the old fence line at the far edge of the yard, at the hills going dark behind it. Because I could not afford to be wrong, she said. If I had brought it out before everything was verified, and it had any flaw in it, any gap, any error, they would have used that flaw to discredit the whole thing. Not just the document, me. And once I was discredited, the document would not recover. She looked at him. I had one chance to do this right. I used the time to make sure it was right. Ted Croft looked at her for a long moment. Then he got in his truck. Back at the Ridgeview Inn, Callum Dre was at the desk with the covenant document in front of him. He had read it 11 times now. His legal team had confirmed what Frank had told him. Viable argument, uncertain outcome. He had a legal team that was excellent and expensive, and he trusted their abilities completely. But viable was not the word he had built his career on, and the uncertainty in Frank Holden's voice when he said, it was the kind of uncertainty that Callum had learned, in 31 years of paying very close attention to people, to take seriously. He wrote a note on his legal pad. He wrote, find out everything about Mara Voss. Then below it, he wrote, she filed at the state office today. Our contact confirmed at 4 this afternoon. He folded the page and put it in his bag pocket. He lay in the dark for a long time before sleeping. For the first time since he had begun the Kessler Ridge acquisition, he went to sleep uncertain. What nobody in Kessler Ridge knew, not Pete Lund, not the Croft family, not Gerald Bray, not her father, was how long Mara had been carrying it. The beginning was a Tuesday afternoon in April, a year and a half before the town hall meeting, in the feed and grain store on the east edge of town. She had gone in to check on a bulk order for the stockyard, and while she was waiting for the owner to run the numbers, she had overheard a conversation between two men at the counter. She had not been trying to listen. She had been looking at the wall calendar and thinking about nothing in particular when the words caught her. "Dre family's been asking questions," one of the men said. "Asking about the east plots. Who owns what the valuations look like." "Just asking?" the other said. "When have the Dre's ever stopped at asking?" That was all. They moved on to other things. But Mara had stood with the wall calendar in front of her and felt something shift in the specific, settling way that things shift when a danger you have been vaguely aware of becomes suddenly precise. She went home that evening and sat at the kitchen table for a long time. She was not a person who moved quickly toward panic. Panic was expensive, and she could not afford it. What she could do was think, and what she thought, at that kitchen table in April, was this. If the Dre family was asking questions, they had already done their research. They were not asking from curiosity. They had a basis for believing acquisition was possible, which meant there was something they saw that she did not see, or something they knew that she did not know, and that the only way to protect against it was to find out what it was. She went to the public library the following Saturday. The Kessler Ridge Library was small but well organized, with a reference section that saw almost no use, and a librarian named Hugh Ferry, who was genuinely glad when someone came in and asked for materials no one usually asked for. She told him she was looking for historical property maps of the county. He brought out a flat plastic sleeve from the back room and spread the maps across the large reference table with careful hands, as if they were something worth treating respectfully, which they were. She came back every other Saturday for 2 months. The maps told a partial story. She could trace the property lines of the East Valley from the original surveys in the early 20th century, compare them against the current maps she found online, and see where they diverged. The divergences were small, a few feet here, a boundary line angled slightly differently there, but they were consistent, and they were consistent in a direction that moved land out of family holdings and into what the records called vacant parcels, which were then purchased by entities that, when she traced them carefully, connected back to the Dre family's holding companies. But she was not a surveyor and could not claim the boundary shifts were deliberate. She needed the paperwork. The county records office was 40 minutes away. She drove there on her days off, Tuesdays and alternate Thursdays, and sat at the reading table in the low-ceilinged records room, where the filing cabinets ran along one wall and the light came from a single window that did not get enough sun. The clerk, a woman named Hazel who wore her reading glasses on a long beaded chain and had worked there for more than 20 years, showed her the filing system on the first visit, and then left her alone with it, which was exactly what Mara needed. The deed records were organized by year and then by type. Mara started at 1960 and moved forward, year by year, category by category. She was methodical in the way that someone is methodical when they have no other tool. She did not have legal training. She did not have access to databases that legal firms used. She had the same filing system that anyone in the county could access, and she used all of it. On her 4th visit, on a Thursday afternoon in late July, she opened the 1962 records and found a subcategory she had not seen before. It was labeled Conditional Instruments. She almost moved past it. The label was dry and bureaucratic and suggested administrative content. She opened it anyway, because she was being thorough. The category contained 7 documents. 6 of them were boundary adjustment instruments, which she had seen in other years. The 7th was a covenant. She read the first paragraph. Then she read it again. Then she closed the folder, stood up, walked to the small window, and stood looking at the parking lot outside for approximately 90 seconds. Then she went back to the table and read the full document from beginning to end without stopping. The 1962 Dre Covenant was exactly what it claimed to be, a legally recorded instrument placing a permanent restriction on the Eastern Valley parcels. It had been signed by a business manager representing the Dre family, a man named Gerard Cross, and witnessed by 2 county officials. It placed a specific restriction on consolidation and a specific condition on usage. It was clear. It was direct. It was, unless something had happened to it that she did not yet know about, fully in force. She asked Hazel to copy it. She put the copy in the inside pocket of her jacket and drove home with both hands on the wheel, and her mind absolutely still, because she had learned to hold very still around things that were important and fragile until she was somewhere safe enough to let herself understand them. She did not tell anyone, not that night, not that week. She sent a written inquiry to the State Archive the following Monday, citing the deed reference and asking for confirmation of the covenant's status. The reply came 6 weeks later, in a plain envelope, a single paragraph. The covenant was a valid recorded instrument, had never been formally dissolved, and remained part of the county's active deed history. She put the letter in a folder. She drove to the copy shop in the next town and made 2 complete copies of everything she had. She put 1 copy under the floorboard in the hallway at home, and 1 in a waterproof pouch inside her locker at the stockyard. She told no one. Then she filed a Freedom of Information request with the county, asking for all subsequent records that referenced the 1962 covenant by deed number. The results came in batches over 4 months. Most of them were unremarkable: standard filing references, administrative notes, routine correspondence. She read all of it. In the 3rd batch, on a Tuesday night in November, she found the memo. It was a single page of internal county correspondence from 1989. The heading identified it as a communication between 2 county officials, and its subject line read, "Reorganization of Conditional Instruments, Highland County Records." The language throughout was careful and bureaucratic, the kind of language that does not say what it means directly, but arranges the words in a way that means it anyway, to anyone reading carefully enough. The memo discussed how certain conditional deed instruments from the 1960s were to be handled during the county filing reorganization of that year. The reorganization, it said, would move these instruments to an archive subcategory that would not be indexed in the standard public reference system. The reasoning given was space efficiency and historical categorization. But what the memo also said, in a sentence near the bottom that she read 4 times, was that this reclassification had been discussed with interested parties, and that the reclassification was expected to resolve outstanding uncertainties in the affected acquisition regions. She sat with the memo for a very long time. She did not know, with certainty, what it meant. She could read it one way, and it was aggressive administrative tidying. She could read it another way, and it was deliberate burial. She could not yet prove which reading was correct. What she knew was that the 1962 covenant had survived the 1989 reorganization because, for whatever reason, it had stayed in the standard index, while other conditional instruments from the same period had apparently not. And she knew that the memo existed, which meant that the reorganization had been a deliberate process, and not simple administrative accident. She put the memo in its own folder, labeled it carefully, and added it to her evidence set. For the next 6 months, she thought about what she had, and what it meant, and whether it was enough. She was not a lawyer. She had not finished college. She was a 23-year-old stockyard worker in a small Highland town, and she had, in a folder under a floorboard, what appeared to be evidence that a 6-decade-old land protection covenant existed, was in force, and had survived a process that appeared to have been designed to remove instruments like it from public knowledge. She verified every piece of what she had one more time. She cross-referenced the covenant language against 2 publicly available legal guides on deed restrictions that she found online. She reread the archive confirmation letter. She reread the memo. Everything held. She decided to wait until the moment of maximum effect. At the State Land Rights Office, the submission that had arrived from Mara Voss on a Thursday morning came to rest on the desk of a senior reviewer named Patricia Oakes, who had worked in the office for 22 years and had a reliable instinct for which submissions were routine and which were not. She read through the 4-page cover letter. She read it again. Then she went to the document copies, read the covenant, and pulled up the county archive's public database to check the deed reference. The reference came up immediately. Confirmed active, confirmed undissolved. She put the submission in a separate folder. She put that folder on top of the stack, to be the first thing she dealt with in the morning. At the same hour, 4 hours from Kessler Ridge, a woman named Dolores Fitch was sitting in her home office, reading on a land rights forum she had followed for years. Someone had shared a link to the first story the Ridge Courier had run about the Kessler Ridge situation. Brief, slightly dismissive, but with enough specific detail that she could see what the real story was beneath the tone. She read it twice. Then she typed the deed reference from the article into the county archives public database. The covenant came up immediately. She took off her reading glasses and set them on the desk. She sat in the silence of her home office and looked at the screen for a long time. She was 71 years old. She had spent 40 years as a land rights attorney. In 1994, she had lost a case against the Dre family, a case she believed she had the stronger position in, a case she had built carefully, a case she had expected to win. The central evidence she needed, a conditional instrument from the 1960s that would have barred the Dre acquisition, had not been in the county record at the time of the hearing. She had found evidence that it should have been there. She had not been able to find the document itself. She had been trying to understand that for 30 years. She stood up from her chair. She went to the bedroom and pulled a bag from the top shelf of the wardrobe. She set it on the bed and began to pack it. She did not hurry, but she did not stop to reconsider. She had the worn brown leather briefcase that she had carried into courtrooms for 4 decades. She took it from the hook behind the office door and set it beside the bag. There was a young woman in Kessler Ridge who had found something. Dolores needed to go and find out what she knew. The diner briefing that Callum Dre held for local business owners was on a Wednesday morning, 4 days after the town hall meeting. He had arranged it carefully. He invited 7 people: the grocery store owner, the hardware supplier, the feed merchant, 2 agricultural contractors who worked the valley and surrounding area, and the only working mechanic in Kessler Ridge. He held it over breakfast, because breakfast meetings are casual, and casual meetings suggest that what is being discussed is not particularly serious, and he needed these 7 people to feel that nothing urgent was happening. He arrived at the diner punctually, poured his own coffee, and spoke for nearly an hour. He was controlled and organized, and he covered everything: the Dre family's contribution to the Highland region economy over 40 years, the employment their operations had generated, the projections from the 2 other communities where they had expanded. He showed printed charts. He answered questions in detail. He was, in the technical sense of the word, persuasive. And then, near the end, with the same tone he might use to note an overcast sky, he made a remark. He said that the situation was in hand, that his legal team was examining the document that had been raised at the meeting, and that while he respected the community's interest in protecting their properties, the matter had been complicated by, and here he paused just briefly, just long enough to give the phrase a small amount of weight, well-meaning individuals with limited legal experience, who sometimes discovered old paperwork and drew conclusions that the paperwork did not actually support. He said it once. He moved on. He did not repeat it or underline it. He did not need to. The implication was already sitting in the room. The covenant was a misunderstanding. The situation was under control. The reasonable thing was to let the professionals handle it. 3 of the 7 laughed. It was a small laugh, the kind that is more about belonging than about anything funny. The other 4 did not laugh. They looked at the table, or at their coffee cups, or at a point slightly above and to the left of Callum's shoulder. Word of the remark reached Mara that evening. Her father mentioned it at dinner. He had heard it from Pete, who had been in the diner for his own lunch, and had overheard part of the conversation secondhand through someone at the counter. She ate her dinner and listened, and then said nothing about it for a while. Her father watched her. "Does it bother you?" he said. "It's useful information," she said. "If their position were strong, they would be stating it. Making comments about me means they are not ready to state it." A week after the briefing, the Ridge Courier ran its first story. The headline was, "Local Claim May Complicate Valley Land Process." The story described the town hall meeting, mentioned the covenant document, and then quoted Frank Holden, saying the document was a historical record that does not materially affect current property rights. Doug Marsh, the editor, had written the story in the careful way of someone who does not want to offend an advertiser, but also cannot print something he knows to be factually wrong. The result was a piece that went sideways, rather than in any particular direction. 3 days later, a second story ran. This one quoted Holden more directly, describing Mara's submission to the state office as an amateur legal effort based on a misinterpretation of historical county records. The story was shorter and less careful than the first. Doug Marsh had received a phone call between the 2 articles, from someone whose name he did not print, which had changed the tone somewhat. Mara read the second story in the break room at the stockyard. She read it once, from beginning to end. Then she folded the newspaper and left it on the break room table for whoever wanted it. Amateur legal effort, Pete said when he read it a few minutes later. I know, she said. Doesn't that make you angry? She thought about it. It tells me the same thing the diner comment told me, she said. They're talking about me, because they have not yet found an argument strong enough to talk about instead. The first note appeared on Tuesday. She found it under her truck's windshield wiper at the end of her evening shift. Plain white paper, folded once, written in a handwriting she did not recognize. You should know when to stop. She stood in the parking lot in the failing light and looked at it. She did not look around to see if anyone was watching. She went inside, found a small plastic bag in the supply room, put the note inside it, sealed it, and took a photograph of the sealed bag with her phone. She saved the photo with the date, time, and location in the file name. She started a folder on her phone specifically for this. The second note was on Thursday morning, attached to the main stockyard gate with a rubber band. It said, "Smart girls know their limits." She bagged it, photographed it, added it to the folder. On Friday, she walked out to her truck at end of shift and found the scratch. It ran from the front wheel arch to the rear door along the driver's side, deep enough that the metal beneath the paint had already begun to change color at the very edges, which told her it had been done the night before. She stood and looked at it in the morning light, without expression. She photographed it from 4 angles. She wrote the details in the notebook she kept in her jacket pocket. Date, time discovered, estimated time of occurrence, physical description. That night, she sat at the kitchen table and typed a formal written complaint to the state attorney's office. She described each incident in plain, factual language. She attached the photographs. She said nothing speculative about who was responsible. She addressed what she knew. She printed it, signed it, and left it on the table to mail in the morning. Her father came in at 9. He saw the envelope. What's that? A complaint I'm filing. About the notes and the truck. She looked at him. Pete told you. I saw the truck myself this morning, he said. His voice was even, but both hands gripped the table edge in a way that was not casual. What does it do, filing the complaint? It creates a record, she said. If there are more incidents, the record shows a pattern. If this ever goes to a formal hearing, and they try to argue that I'm acting from personal anxiety rather than legal grounds, the record also shows who was doing the pressuring. He was quiet for a moment. Are you scared? She set down the pen. She thought about the question the way she thought about things that deserved honest attention. The truck scared me a little, she said, not the scratch itself. The fact that it means someone knows where I park and when. That means I'm being watched in a way I'd rather not be. She looked at him directly. But I planned for pressure. I expected it. I'm not going to stop. George Voss nodded once. He did not say anything else about it, because she had told him clearly that she knew what she was doing, and he trusted her judgment in the particular way that parents sometimes reach, not through decision, but through the quiet accumulation of evidence that the child standing in front of them knows things you do not. She mailed the complaint the next morning. In his room at the Ridgeview Inn, Callum's meeting with Frank Holden was not going well. Frank had laid out their legal position on the desk. The covenant was real, the archive confirmation was unambiguous, and their viable argument, that non-enforcement over 6 decades constituted effective administrative abandonment, had been reviewed by 2 additional attorneys whose opinions Frank had solicited, and whose verdicts had been, in different formulations, cautiously uncertain. The internal memo is the part I can't get comfortable with, Frank said. He had it on the desk in front of him, the copy they had pulled from the archive, using the same Freedom of Information request number Mara had cited. It is genuinely ambiguous. If a judge reads it as routine administration, we are fine. If a judge reads it as evidence of deliberate instrument suppression, the picture changes. Callum looked at the memo. He had read it himself now, 6 times. He had tried each time to read it as routine administration, and he had almost convinced himself, almost, except for that one sentence near the bottom about interested parties and outstanding uncertainties. That sentence did not read as routine. What are our clean moves, he said. There are not many, Frank said honestly. He was a good lawyer, partly because he was honest with his clients about things they did not want to hear. We could challenge the submission on the grounds that it was made by a private individual without standing, but it's in the official town meeting record, which Gerald Bray has refused to alter, and challenging that would look exactly like what it is. What is it? Callum said. An attempt to suppress evidence from a public hearing, Frank said. The room was quiet. We could approach the families directly, Carol Finch said. She had been quiet in the corner, making notes. Separate conversations, individual offers. Some of them are in difficult financial positions. The protection order applications, Frank said. 3 of the 6 families have filed emergency land protection orders with the state office since the town hall meeting. Those orders, if granted, freeze all acquisition-related activity for the duration of the review. Callum looked up. 3 families filed already? The Crofts, the Lundquists, and the Norths, Frank said. The Haydens and the Brecks have not yet. But they might, Callum said. They might, Frank agreed. Callum stood up from the desk. He walked to the window and looked out at the main road of Kessler Ridge in the gray morning light. It was an ordinary road, in an ordinary place, and the ordinary people on it had, somehow, found someone who had turned 18 months of quiet work in the county records office into what was becoming a genuinely serious legal situation. He thought about the woman in the second-hand jacket who had walked to the front of the room and unfolded a piece of paper without a tremor in her voice. He thought about the fact that she had been carrying this for a year and a half and had told no one. He turned from the window. "What is the correct move?" he said. Frank chose his words with care. "The correct move," he said, "is to let the state review run its course and hope the covenant proves unenforceable. The aggressive moves, the document challenges, the newspaper contacts, anything that applies external pressure to the families or to the individual involved, those moves carry risk if the review goes against us, because they create a pattern that a court will notice." "You're telling me to do nothing," Callum said. "I'm telling you that the things we can do actively are more dangerous than waiting," Frank said. Callum looked at the desk. He thought about the comfortable certainty he had felt when he drove into Kessler Ridge 10 days ago, and how far away it seemed now. "Keep working on the enforceability argument," he said, "and find out what the state office is doing with the submission." He sat back down and reached for his phone. It was a conversation he did not know how to finish, because it was becoming clear to him that the situation had not been what he had believed it to be, and the distance between what he had believed and what was actually true was wider than anything his preparation had accounted for. The knock came at 7:30 on a Thursday evening, when Mara was at the kitchen table reviewing the archive confirmation letter for what was probably the 18th time. She was not expecting anyone. She opened the door to find a small woman with white hair cut short and eyes that made immediate, direct contact, the way the eyes of people do who have spent decades in rooms where looking away costs you something. She was carrying a worn brown leather briefcase. She looked like someone who had driven a long way and had not stopped to reconsider it. "My name is Dolores Fitch," the woman said. "Retired land rights attorney, 40 years of practice. I've read about your case. I drove from Millhaven." She said it all in a single breath, matter of fact, like a set of facts being entered into a record. "I'd like to talk with you, if you have time." Mara looked at her for a moment, then she stepped back from the door. They sat at the kitchen table. Mara put the kettle on. Her father was in the living room with the television on low. It sounded like company in a distant room. Dolores opened her briefcase and took out a folder. She placed it on the table but did not open it immediately. "In 1994, she said, I represented a farming family in the next county. They were in a land dispute with the Dre family. Our case was strong. We had documentation of a restriction on the disputed land, a conditional instrument from the 1960s, similar in nature to what you found. The difference was that by the time we needed it, the original document was not in the county record. It was gone." Mara set the tea down and sat. "I believed then, and I believe now, that it was not gone by accident," Dolores said. "I spent years trying to prove that. I could not. We lost the case." She paused. "The deed reference from your submission corresponds to the same 1960s filing period and the same category of conditional instrument as the one I was missing in 1994. You think they're related," Mara said. "I think it is more than possible," Dolores said. She opened the folder. "The internal memo you submitted, the 1989 document about the reorganization, is the first concrete evidence I have seen in 30 years that supports what I have always believed. That the disappearance of conditional instruments from Highland County records was not administrative accident, that it was connected to the Dre family's acquisition activities in this region. The kitchen was completely quiet. Outside, the wind moved in the dry grass. "What is the scale of it?" Mara asked. "What do you think happened?" "At minimum, 3 counties. Over 30 years, Dolores said, possibly more. The pattern would be, identify conditional instruments that restrict acquisition in target areas. Arrange for those instruments to be removed from the standard filing index during a reorganization that provides administrative cover, then proceed with acquisitions that the instruments would have blocked." Mara looked at the table. She had read the 1989 memo 30 times. She had read it as ambiguous because she had been careful about not claiming more than she could prove. But the reading Dolores was describing was the reading she had always suspected was correct. The 1962 covenant survived the reorganization, Mara said. "Yes," Dolores said. "Either they missed it, which is possible, it was in an unusual subcategory, or they left it because it seemed obscure enough that no one would ever look." She looked at Mara steadily. "You looked." "I went to the records office 4 times, Mara said. "I know," Dolores said. "That is more times than anyone else has been in that room with this specific purpose in 30 years. Mara was quiet for a moment. "What do you want from me?" she said. "Permission to participate in the state review as an amicus party," Dolores said. "I am not asking to take over your case. It is your case, and it should remain yours. I want to contribute what I know in a way that supports what you have already built. I need to verify everything you've told me," Mara said. "Of course you do," Dolores said, and the tone was not defensive or impatient. It was something closer to satisfaction. Dolores put her business card on the table. It was old, with one corner slightly creased. She also put a handwritten page of reference information on the table, the 1994 case number, the county where it had been heard, the names of the parties. "I expected you to check," Dolores said. "I would think less of you if you didn't." Simon Carr had been a journalist for 11 years, the last 9 of them at a regional newspaper called the Highland Record. It covered 3 counties, had a loyal if modest readership, and was not connected in any way to the Dre family or their associated business interests. Simon had tried 3 years ago to investigate the Dre family's land acquisitions in the next county. The investigation had stalled at every turn, record requests coming back incomplete, sources going quiet, a politely worded legal letter arriving at his editor's desk that had resulted in a different story being run that week. He had filed his notes in a drawer and told himself the story would come back around eventually. He had just read the Ridge Courier article about the Kessler Ridge situation. He was sitting at his desk in the Highland Records offices on a Thursday afternoon when he read it, and he felt the sharp, specific feeling that journalists feel when a story they have been carrying for years suddenly reappears in a form they can actually use. He drove to Kessler Ridge on a Tuesday without telling anyone where he was going. He went to the county records office first. The clerk found the original 1962 covenant in 12 minutes. He sat at the reading table and read it with both hands flat on the surface, and the particular stillness of someone who has found something they looked for. Then he drove to the stockyard. He found Mara washing up at the outdoor sink after her shift. He introduced himself honestly. He told her where he worked, why he was there, what he had tried to do 3 years ago and why it had failed. He did not try to be persuasive. He stated the facts. She looked at him when he finished. "I don't give interviews," she said. "I'm not asking for an interview," he said. "I'm investigating the Dre acquisition history across the region. What I find, I'd like to share with you. You don't owe me anything in return." She studied him. She was good at assessing whether people meant what they said. "If you find something that's consistent with what I've already submitted to the state office," she said, "I'll look at it. I'm not promising anything else." "That's all I'm asking," he said. He drove home and started making calls. Over the next 3 weeks, Simon went through property records in all 3 Highland counties, pulling conditional instruments from the 1960s, and cross-referencing their presence or absence against the county's post-1989 Dre acquisition history. It was meticulous and slow work, and it produced a pattern that was clear enough to be significant, but documented carefully enough to be accurate. In 2 of the 3 counties, conditional instruments from the 1960s, that should have been in the standard deed record, were absent entirely. In the 3rd county, the instruments were present in the archive, but their reference numbers had been altered in the digital filing system, so that a standard public search would not return them. Only a manual check against the pre-digital ledgers would find them. He brought his notes to Mara on a Friday evening. She read through them at the kitchen table without speaking. Simon sat across from her with a cup of tea going cold. When she set the notes down, she said, "This is consistent with the 1989 memo." "I know," he said. "You haven't published any of this." "No," he said. "I am not going to publish while the state review is active. A news story at the wrong moment could create public pressure that complicates the legal process, and I don't want to do that to your case." He paused. "But when the review is complete, I will publish everything. I want you to know that clearly." She looked at him. "That's fair," she said. Among the 6 families, the weeks since the town hall meeting had produced different states of mind in different households. Carl Hayden was a careful man who thought in terms of what was in front of him. What was in front of him was a bank loan with 3 missed payments, a farm that needed 2 new pieces of equipment he had not been able to buy, and a voice on the phone every Tuesday evening from a man named Alan who worked for the Dre acquisition team and whose patience and warmth, Carl had noticed, never varied, regardless of how many times Carl did not call back. He had not returned the last 2 calls. His wife, Lynn, found out about the calls on a Wednesday morning when she answered the phone herself, and Alan introduced himself cheerfully and asked if he could speak with Carl. She took a message and sat at the kitchen table for a long time afterward. When Carl came in for lunch, she was still sitting there. "Alan from the Dre office," she said. He sat down. He did not deny it. "How many times?" she asked. "4 times," he said. "I haven't answered." Lynn looked out the window at the 50 acres that had been in her family for 3 generations. "But you've been thinking about it," she said. He was honest with her. He always had been, which was one of the things she loved about him. "The loan is at 4 missed payments by end of month," he said. "If the state review takes a year and nothing is resolved, I don't know how we hold the farm while we hold the land." "Then we need to talk to Mara," Lynn said. "She may not have answers." "She has more answers than we do," Lynn said. "And she's been fighting while everyone else has been waiting. I think it's time we stopped waiting." They drove to the Voss farm that evening. Mara came out to meet them. They stood by the gate in the cooling air, and Carl explained the situation. The loan, the calls, the math. When he finished, she said, "The state review may qualify your household for an emergency land protection order. It would freeze acquisition activity and any financial pressure related to the land while the review is active, including bank communications." Carl said, "Is that guaranteed?" "It's not guaranteed," she said, "but Dolores Fitch, the attorney who came to see me, has agreed to file on behalf of any family that wants to apply, at no cost." He looked at her for a moment. "What do I tell Alan if he calls again?" he said. "Tell him your land matters are currently under review by the State Land Rights Office, and you have been advised not to discuss them while the review is active," she said. "That's all you need to say." Carl was quiet. The mathematics of his situation had not changed. But something else had shifted. The feeling of being alone in an impossible choice had lessened, not disappeared but lessened, and that mattered more than he had expected it to. Lynn put her hand briefly on Mara's arm. She did not say anything. Some things did not need words. Driving home, Carl said, "She's not what I expected." "What did you expect?" Lynn said. He thought about it. "Someone louder," he said. Lynn looked at the dark valley through the passenger window. The lights of the farmhouses along the east edge were small and steady in the black. "Loud people take up space," she said. She was busy doing the work. At the Voss kitchen table, after the Haydens had gone, Mara updated her log. At the bottom of the entry, she wrote 4 words. "The coalition is building." She capped the pen. She put the notebook away. She went to bed. The request for a private meeting came through Gerald Bray, who received a call from Frank Holden one afternoon and relayed the message to Mara verbatim. Callum Dre would like to meet without legal representatives on either side, at a time and place of her choosing, with no set agenda beyond a direct conversation. Mara listened to the entire message. Then she said, "Tell him the diner on Main Road, Friday morning at 7. She chose the diner because it was a public location. Anyone who came in for breakfast would be able to see that the meeting was happening. She wanted that visibility. She did not want a private meeting to be used afterward as evidence that she had been willing to negotiate in ways that the community did not know about. 7 in the morning, because the Friday breakfast crowd was thin at that hour, and the corner table by the window was usually free, which would give them enough distance from other customers to speak without being overheard. She called Dolores after speaking with Gerald. Dolores listened to the whole thing and then said, "You don't have to go." "I know," Mara said. "And whatever he says or offers, you are under no obligation." "I know that." "Then go," Dolores said. "Listen carefully. Say as little as you need to. You might learn something about how they're reading the situation." Mara arrived at the diner at 10 minutes to 7. She chose the corner table and sat with her back to the wall, which put the door in her line of sight. She ordered coffee. She drank half of it slowly. Callum came in at exactly 7. He was alone. No briefcase, no driver, no jacket. Just a dark shirt and trousers, and the same contained, unhurried way of moving that she had observed in every encounter with him. He found her, came to the corner table, and sat down. He ordered coffee. He looked at his hands briefly. Then he looked at her. "Thank you for coming," he said. "You asked for the meeting," she said. "I don't have a great deal of time to waste, so." He understood the directness and accepted it without adjustment. "I'll be brief," he said. "My legal team has been reviewing the state office situation fully. The review is going to be thorough. There is a meaningful possibility that it does not go in our favor." He paused. "I want to make an offer, not a settlement. I want to be clear about that distinction. A resolution. I'm prepared to withdraw the acquisition bid for the East Valley plots entirely." She said nothing. "In exchange," he said, "I would ask that the families agree not to pursue the 1989 memo as the basis for a broader legal challenge to the family's acquisition history." He reached into his shirt pocket and took out an envelope. He set it on the table between them. "There would also be financial compensation for the families," he said, "to acknowledge the disruption of the past months." She looked at the envelope. She looked at it for a full 10 seconds, which is a long time. "How much?" she said. He told her. The number was large, genuinely large. It was the kind of number that would clear Carl Hayden's loan, with enough left over, to buy the equipment he had not been able to afford. It was the kind of number that would allow Ted Croft to retire the way he had once talked about retiring, before he had stopped talking about it. For her father, sitting on the porch with his hands at rest, it was the kind of number that could change the texture of a life. She looked at the envelope for another moment. Then she looked at Callum. "What happens to the 2 communities in the other counties?" she said. "The ones where your family made acquisitions, and no one found the covenant before you arrived." He was quiet. "Do those families receive the same offer?" she said. Still quiet. "This offer is not about being fair to us," she said. "It's about closing the 1989 memo before someone uses it to open the full acquisition history." She looked at him without any particular heat, just with the directness that she applied to most things. "You know what the memo leads to if it goes into a formal state review. That is what this offer is actually about." He looked at her for a long moment. Something moved in his expression. Not anger, not contempt, but something more complicated and harder to name. "You're right," he said. "That is partially what it's for." She was genuinely surprised that he said it. She had expected a denial. She had prepared for a denial. She had not prepared for agreement. She picked up the envelope and slid it back across the table to his side. Not forcefully, just moved it. "If this land were legally yours without the covenant," she said, "you would not need me to be quiet about the memo." He looked at the envelope. He did not pick it up. Around them, the diner was gathering its modest Friday morning life. The cook in the kitchen was moving plates. A couple at the counter was discussing something about a fence repair. The ordinary morning was proceeding in its ordinary way, entirely indifferent to the conversation in the corner. "Can I ask you something?" Callum said. She waited. "Why did you do it?" he said. Not with mockery, not with the slightly patronizing curiosity that powerful people sometimes use when asking questions of people they consider beneath them. He asked it plainly. 18 months of research. Alone. After your shifts at the stockyard. No legal background, no support. Why? She thought about the question. It deserved an honest answer. "Because my father's land is out there," she said. "And because it was the right thing to do. And because nobody else was going to do it." He nodded. He looked at his coffee. It had gone cold, and he had not drunk much of it. "I was raised to believe," he said slowly. That if you could outthink or out-resource someone, the outcome was just. That winning an argument was the same as being right. He stopped. He was not performing. His voice had the slightly rough quality of someone who is saying something they have arrived at recently and have not yet had time to polish. I'm beginning to think those two things have nothing to do with each other. They don't, she said simply. They sat in a silence that was not unfriendly, but was not comfortable. Outside, a truck moved slowly down Main Road. The engine sound rose, and then dropped, and then was gone. What do you think will happen? He asked. With the review. I don't control that, she said. The state office does. What they find, and what they decide with it, that determines what comes next. She looked at him. If I were you, I would stop looking for ways to minimize the documents. And I would start thinking seriously about what it means if you can't. He looked at the table. And if the review opens our previous acquisitions to examination, he said. Then you deal with it, she said. That is all any of us can do with the consequences of what we have done. She stood up. She put her jacket on. He stayed seated. For what it's worth, he said, you are the most thoroughly prepared person I have encountered in my professional life. She put money for the coffee on the table. This is not a professional setting, she said. This is a diner, but thank you. She walked out. He sat at the corner table alone. The waitress came and refilled his cold coffee without asking. He wrapped his hands around the cup. He thought about what she had said. If the land were legally yours, you would not need me to be quiet. He had been in negotiations for his entire adult life. He had been good at them, consistently, reliably good, in ways that had made the family's business what it was. He knew how to find the point of pressure. He knew how to make an offer that was generous enough to be accepted, but structured enough to serve his purposes. He had done all of that this morning, and he had done it well, and it had not worked. Not because her position was stronger than his, though it was. Not because she was cleverer than he was, though she might have been. It had not worked, because she had seen through the architecture of the offer immediately, and named what it was for in plain language that left no room for reinterpretation. And then she had pushed it back across the table, without any apparent hesitation. He picked up the envelope and put it in his shirt pocket. He called Frank Holden. When Frank answered, he said, I want you to stop the pressure strategy. Stop the newspaper contacts. Stop any outreach to the county. Let the state review run without interference from our side. Frank was quiet for a moment. That is a significant change of direction, he said carefully. I know, Callum said. Make the calls. He ended the call. He sat in the diner for a few more minutes. Then he went back to the Ridgeview and called his father. The State Land Rights Office's preliminary review became a formal investigation on a Tuesday morning 5 weeks after Mara's original submission. It happened in a conference room on the second floor of the beige building in the Capitol, where Claire Sutton had laid out 17 documents across the length of the table and was going through them with Patricia Oakes and a senior legal advisor. The 17 documents were the result of the office's own records pull from all 3 Highland counties, a pull that had been triggered by the pattern analysis that Dolores Fitch had formally submitted as an amicus document. Claire pointed to each one in order. 3 counties, 3 separate post-1989 Dray acquisition areas, and in each one, a conditional deed instrument from the 1960s that should be in the standard public record, missing, altered, or inaccessible through the normal filing system. The Kessler Ridge Covenant was the only one that had survived intact. This is not coincidence, Claire said. No, Patricia said. And it's not administrative accident, Claire said. Administrative accidents don't repeat the same pattern in the same direction across 3 counties over 30 years. She called the state attorney's land division that afternoon. The supervising attorney there was a woman named Gloria Hearn, who had 14 years of experience and a reputation for reading situations accurately and acting on them precisely. Claire sent her the full consolidated file. Gloria read it in 2 hours. Then she called Claire back. I want to open a full investigation, she said. We expected that, Claire said. How did a stockyard worker in Kessler Ridge find what we missed? Gloria said. She went to the county records office on her days off, Claire said. She pulled the conditional instruments category, which most people don't know exists. She found the document, verified it through the archive, and filed a Freedom of Information request for everything that referenced it. Then she sat on all of it for 18 months until she was completely certain. Gloria was quiet for a moment. "I want to talk to her," she said. "She doesn't give interviews," Claire said. "Tell her it's not an interview," Gloria said. The investigation moved on two tracks. The first focused on the Kessler Ridge Covenant specifically, and its applicability to the current situation. The second, broader and deeper, examined the 1989 filing reorganization across all three counties, looking for evidence of deliberate instrument suppression. On the first track, the investigators pulled the Covenant signature records. One of the two county witnesses, a planning clerk named Owen Reese, was 84 years old and living in a care facility in the regional capital. An investigator named Paul Drum drove to the facility on a Tuesday morning. Owen Reese had a room overlooking a small courtyard with a fountain. He sat in the chair by the window with a cup of warm water and listened to Paul Drum's questions with the unhurried attention of a man who has been waiting for something without knowing when it would arrive. He confirmed the 1962 covenant signing. He confirmed the identity of the Dre representative, a business manager named Gerard Cross. He confirmed what the covenant contained and what it meant. Then he said something Paul had not asked. "In 1989, Owen said, I received a letter from a man named Dale Pruitt. We had worked together in county administration for many years before I retired. He asked me to sign a document confirming that I had no objection to the reclassification of certain historical deed instruments from the 1960s. He told me it was routine, a filing reorganization." Paul Drum kept his pen moving steadily. "I trusted Dale," Owen said. "We had known each other for 30 years. I signed the document without examining what it specifically concerned." He looked out at the courtyard fountain. A small bird was at the edge of the water. "I understood what I had signed when I read the newspaper story about the young woman in Kessler Ridge. I understood what had been reclassified." He looked at Paul. "I should very much like to give a formal statement," he said. Paul's pen did not stop. "Yes," he said. "I was hoping you would." Owen Reese's sworn statement, given that afternoon in the care facility's small meeting room, became one of the central documents in the state attorney's investigation. It connected the 1989 reorganization to a deliberate effort to remove conditional instruments from public access. It named Dale Pruitt, who had died in 2017, and it named two other county officials from that period, who were still living, and whose signatures appeared on multiple reorganization documents. The full weight of what Mara had started in the county records office on a Thursday afternoon, with nothing but time and determination, was becoming visible. Frank Holden received notification from the state attorney's office on a Friday. He read the formal letter twice, then called Callum. Callum answered on the second ring. He was at the Ridgeview, where he had extended his stay week by week for the past month, telling himself and Frank that he wanted to be close to the situation as it developed. "The scope is broader than Kessler Ridge," Frank said. He was in his car, in the courthouse parking lot. "They have a witness, a living witness, who witnessed the 1962 covenant signing, and who can speak to what the 1989 letter asked him to do." Callum said nothing. Frank told him about Owen Reese. The line was quiet for a long time. "What is our exposure?" Callum said finally. Frank chose his words the way he always chose them with important clients. Carefully, honestly, without false comfort. "The covenant itself is the most immediate matter. The previous acquisitions are a secondary concern, but if the investigation establishes that the 1989 reorganization was deliberate, those acquisitions may be subject to examination." He paused. "I think you need to call your father." Callum sat by the window after the call ended. He had been in Kessler Ridge for 5 weeks. He had come in certainty, and he had stayed in uncertainty. And now the uncertainty had a specific, named shape. He called his father. The conversation was long. Its contents remained between the two of them, but its result was concrete. 3 days later, the Dre family's legal team filed a written statement with the state attorney's office, indicating full cooperation with the investigation and offering voluntary disclosure of the acquisition history across all 3 Highland counties. The news broke on a Monday. A journalist monitoring the state attorney's public case filings spotted the Dre investigation reference and filed a short piece for a regional wire service. That piece was picked up by 4 larger outlets within the same day. By Tuesday morning, it was in print in 2 major newspapers. The stories were accurate in their essentials and somewhat dramatic in their presentation, as major newspaper stories about investigations often are. They named the Dre family, described the Kessler Ridge Covenant, described the state investigation, and the three-county scope. One story, in a national publication that covered agricultural land policy, mentioned Mara Voss, a stockyard worker from Kessler Ridge with no legal background, who had found a 60-year-old covenant in the county records office and submitted it to the state. A photographer from the Regional Wire Service drove to Kessler Ridge to take pictures. He photographed the community center, the main road, the East Valley. He photographed Callum Dre, who had been requested to appear at the county courthouse for a preliminary investigator meeting, walking out of the building alone with his briefcase in one hand, and no one waiting for him on the steps. The photograph was taken from the far side of the road. In it, Callum's face was slightly turned, his expression unreadable. The image carried something that had nothing to do with the caption. It carried the weight of a reversal. The same photographer, on his way out of town, stopped at the stockyard. He asked a worker where Mara Voss was. The worker pointed to the far end of the yard. The photographer looked. She was moving through the cattle pens with a clipboard and the practiced, economical motion of someone whose body knows the work well enough that the mind is free to be elsewhere. Except that hers was clearly not elsewhere. She was paying full attention to what was in front of her, the animals and the lines, and the ordinary specific requirements of the morning. He took the photograph from where he stood. He did not approach her or ask. She did not see him. 2 weeks later, a national agriculture magazine ran the two photographs side by side across a full page. Callum, coming out of the courthouse alone. Mara, working at the stockyard. The headline above them said, "Who has the power now?" In Kessler Ridge, the grocery store received its usual supply of the magazine on a Thursday. It sold out before lunch. The store owner ordered more. They sold out too. Doug Marsh at the Ridge Courier read the magazine piece in his office and sat with it for a long time. He thought about the two articles he had written, the first one dismissive, the second one quoting Frank Holden calling Mara's work amateur. He thought about the phone call he had received between the two articles, from the person whose name he had not printed. He wrote a news story that week. He wrote it without outside input, without any calls to or from anyone connected to the Dre operation. He wrote it about Mara Voss, who she was, what she had done, how she had done it, and what it had led to. He did not describe her work as amateur or inexperienced. He described it as what it was, thorough, patient, and correct. He published it on a Thursday. It was the most read story the Ridge Courier had run in its current form. Pete Lund found Mara at the stockyard that afternoon and said, "You're in the national papers." "I know," she said. "Does that mean anything to you?" "Any of it?" She thought about the question. "It means people are paying attention to the right thing," she said. "The story was always about the land, not about me." "But you're in it," Pete said. She looked at him. "The land would have been lost without the covenant," she said. "The covenant would not have been found without the records office. The records office was available to anyone in this county who wanted to go there." She went back to the waterline. "It's all ordinary. It just needed someone to do it." Pete watched her for a moment. Then he went back to work. 3 days after the magazine photographs ran side by side, and 2 days after Callum Dre had returned to Kessler Ridge from the Capitol, where he had spent 6 hours in a conference room answering the investigation team's questions with the full cooperation his family had committed to, he drove himself to the stockyard. Not with his driver. Not in the long company vehicle. In a dark, ordinary truck that anyone would have driven. He parked in the gravel lot at 20 minutes past 8 in the morning, which was the heart of the stockyard's busiest hour. He got out and stood by the gate. The yard was fully active. Pete Lund was working a water line near the far barn. 2 other workers, a man named Gary and a woman named Helen, were at the feeding station. A young man named Eddie was running the cattle chute. A supplier named Felix, who drove in from 2 counties east with a regular delivery, was at the main gate with his manifest, talking to Mara. Or he had been talking to her. He stopped talking and looked at Callum. Pete Lund looked over. Gary and Helen turned. Eddie stopped moving and let his hands fall to his sides. The yard went still in the way that yards and rooms and open spaces go still when something is happening that nobody expected. Callum walked across the gravel. He walked to where Mara was standing with the manifest in her hands and he stopped in front of her. She looked up from the manifest and saw him. Her expression did not shift in any particular direction. She waited. "I'm sorry," he said. He said it without introduction, without the preamble of important men who need to establish context before getting to the point. He said it the way someone says it when they mean it, in a way that has been building for a while. "I came here to say that to you directly," he said, "not through a lawyer, not through a letter, not through a representative. To your face, in front of witnesses, which seems right, given the things that were done." He stopped. He was not reading from anything. "The way I operated in this valley, the briefings, the newspaper contacts, the notes that appeared on your property, the damage to your truck. I cannot prove who specifically did those last things, but I know they were connected to the pressure being applied from my side. I know that, and I am sorry for it." Nobody in the yard moved. "I was raised to believe that the ability to acquire something was the same as the right to acquire it," he said. "That if you had the resources, and the preparation, and the legal team, the outcome was just by definition." He paused, and his voice had the rough quality of a thing that is being said for the first time out loud, not rehearsed, not composed. "What you showed me, what everything that has happened since you walked to the front of that meeting room has shown me, is that those two things have nothing to do with each other. That being effective at taking things does not make the taking right." The silence in the yard was complete. "I want the investigation to go wherever it needs to go," he said. "My family is cooperating with the state attorney fully, without conditions. Whatever that means for previous acquisitions, we will deal with it. I'm not here to ask you for anything in connection with that. That is out of both our hands now." He looked at her directly. "I just needed you to hear me say this in a place where it could not be edited or managed. That is all I came for." He stopped. The morning held itself. Mara looked at him. She had thought, in the abstract, about what a moment of acknowledgement from him might look like. She had not imagined this. She had not imagined him coming to her place of work, at her working hour, and saying it this plainly without anyone asking him to. She thought about what he had said. She thought about whether she believed it. "I heard you," she said. He nodded once. "The investigation and what it finds, that's between you and the state office," she said. "I'm not a party to what happens next on the legal side." She paused. "But the other towns, the families and the places where acquisitions already happened, and where the covenant was not found in time. Whatever the investigation uncovers will apply to them. I want you to understand that clearly." "Yes," he said, simply, and without qualification. She looked at him for a moment more. Then she held out her hand. He shook it. His grip was firm and brief. He turned, and walked back across the gravel to his truck. He did not look back. He got in, started the engine, and drove away down Main Road. The yard was quiet for a long moment after the sound of the engine had faded into the distance. Felix the supplier cleared his throat. "Was that Callum Dre?" he said. "What just happened?" She looked at the manifest in her hands. "It's a long story," she said. "Now, page 2. The weight count on the third load. You said there was a discrepancy?" Felix blinked. He looked at his own copy of the manifest. He found his place. They went back to the delivery. In the far barn, Pete Lund stood with one hand on the waterline handle and did not move for a long moment. He was a straightforward man who did not think in terms of historic moments or significant turning points. He was not, by nature, a person who looked for meaning in events. But he stood there, and he recognized what he had just seen, with the particular clarity that sometimes arrives without invitation. She had done all of this, starting 18 months ago, in the county records office, alone, on a Tuesday morning, with nothing but her own persistence, and the filing system that was available to anyone who wanted to use it. She had done it in secret, at midnight, and in the early hours before her shifts, without telling anyone, without asking for help, without any of the resources that powerful people take for granted. She had done it because the land needed protecting, and because nobody else was going to do it. And it had come to this, the most powerful man in the valley, coming to her yard, on an ordinary morning, and apologizing in front of witnesses for what he had done. Pete picked up the waterline handle and went back to work. Word moved through Kessler Ridge by midday. It always did. People heard it in fragments. The stockyard delivery driver told 2 people. One of them told 3. The phone and the diner counter, and the conversations at the grocery store did the rest. By afternoon, most of the town knew that Callum Dre had gone to the stockyard and apologized to Mara Voss without being asked. Ted Croft heard it from B, who heard it from the grocery store owner. He drove slowly past the stockyard on his way home, just looking, and then kept going. Dorothy Lundquist sat on her porch when the news reached her, and said to the open air, "I'll believe it when I see what he does next." Carl Hayden heard it over dinner. He put down his fork and thought about it. Lynn said, "Do you think he meant it?" "I think he might," Carl said. "But Mara is right to wait and see what he actually does." "What do you mean?" Lynn said. "An apology is words," Carl said. "What it costs him to fix what he's broken, that's the part that tells you if the words were real." Doug Marsh was already writing the story when he heard the details confirmed from Felix, who agreed to be quoted. He wrote it carefully, as a factual account of an unusual event. He did not describe it as dramatic. He described it as what it was: a man who had driven to someone's workplace and told her he was wrong. He published it the next morning. It was the second most read story he had ever run, after the one he had written about Mara herself. The state attorney's office read both stories the same day. Gloria Hearn read them over lunch at her desk and then called Claire Sutton. "How are the protection order applications?" she asked. "All 6 families have filed," Claire said. "The Haydens were the last. They filed Monday." "Good," Gloria said. "Then I want to request a formal hearing. I want the covenant before a judge." She paused. "And I want Dolores Fitch in that courtroom." "She'll be there," Claire said. "She's been waiting for it for 30 years. Mara spent the evening after the apology doing the same things she did every evening. She cooked dinner. She updated her log. She sat at the kitchen table with her tea. Her father had heard about what happened from Pete, who had stopped by the farm on his way home. "Did you believe him?" George said. She thought about it honestly. "I believe that he meant it in the moment," she said. "Whether it translates into what he does going forward, that I don't know yet." George was quiet. "I'm not focused on him," she said. "I'm focused on the hearing." She looked at him across the table. Her father, who had sat on this porch and looked at this land for 61 years, and who was still looking at it. "I'm proud of you," he said. He said it simply, without weight, as if it were just one more true thing. She looked at him, and did not say anything. She did not need to. Outside, the valley was dark, the hills were steady against the sky, and the land was out there exactly as it had always been. Neither frightened nor triumphant, simply present, simply waiting to see what the people fighting over it would finally decide. The court hearing was not a single day. It was 7 sessions spread across 3 weeks, held in a county courtroom that was large enough to hold the community, but not large enough to hold it comfortably, and which filled to capacity every morning regardless of the weather. People drove from Kessler Ridge for each session. Ted and B. Croft came every day without exception, sitting in the second row with their coats folded in their laps, arriving before the doors opened and staying until the building emptied. Dorothy Lundquist came every day too, and she sat with her back straight and her jaw set, and she looked at the proceedings the way a person looks at something they have been waiting a long time to see. Carl and Lynn Hayden came to 4 of the 7 sessions. Lynn sat with her hands clasped and watched everything carefully. Carl watched the Dre family's legal team, reduced now from what it had been at the town hall meeting, with the quiet attention of a man who was no longer afraid of them. Dolores Fitch presented the family's case. She was 71 years old, and she walked into the courtroom with the unhurried, undemonstrative confidence of someone who knows their material at a level that goes deeper than preparation. She had been preparing for this for 30 years without knowing it, and it showed in the way that deep knowledge shows, not in performance or display, but in a quality of stillness that comes from having no doubt about what you know. She wore the same jacket she had worn to Mara's kitchen table. She carried the worn brown briefcase. She presented the 1962 covenant first. She explained its terms, its original purpose, and its current legal status as a valid recorded instrument. She presented the archive confirmation. She presented the Freedom of Information records. She presented the 1989 internal memo. She presented Owen Reese's sworn statement, which he had given in writing in addition to verbally, because he was 84 and wanted it on record in a form that would survive him. She presented Simon Carr's 3-county pattern analysis, entered as documentary context rather than direct evidence. Each piece was connected to the next. Each piece had been verified. There were no gaps and no guesses. The Dre family's legal team, presenting for the other side, cross-examined each piece of evidence with care and technical skill. Their central position was one of practical argument, rather than factual dispute. They did not dispute that the covenant existed. They argued that the practical reality of 60 years of subsequent land activity, years during which no party had ever invoked the covenant, during which properties had changed hands, surveys had been redone, and the county's entire land record system had been reorganized, amounted to a kind of effective abandonment that made strict enforcement disproportionate to the current situation. It was not an unreasonable argument. Dolores had expected it. She responded, in her closing submission, with a single clear statement. A covenant is not abandoned by being hidden. Its legal force is not diminished by the fact that the people who most needed it did not know it was there. The specific purpose of a legal instrument recorded in the public deed record is to outlast the particular moment of its creation, and to apply whenever the situation it was designed to address arises. That situation had now arisen. The instrument was present, undissolved, and clear in its terms. Judge Margaret Foss had been on the bench for 14 years. She was a lean woman, with gray-streaked hair and reading glasses that she wore during testimony, and removed when she was about to say something important. She had asked questions at several points during the hearing, not many, but each one went directly to the center of the matter. On the 5th day, she asked Dolores one question. "If the covenant is found to be enforceable," she said, "what specific remedy are you seeking on behalf of the families?" Dolores said, "Judicial confirmation that the covenant is in effect and constitutes a legal bar to the consolidation of the East Valley parcels under single private ownership, and placement of those parcels under a protective agricultural trust, administered jointly by the county and the 6 families, with charter terms that prevent future dissolution by any single buyer." The judge wrote something on her pad. Closing arguments were made on the 7th day. The Dre team's closing was measured and technically precise, as it had been throughout. Dolores's closing was also technically precise, but it had something the other sides lacked: the weight of a clear and documented history behind every word. Judge Foss called a recess of 10 days. Those 10 days were the hardest part. Not because anything was happening. That was precisely the difficulty. The hearing was over, and the evidence was in, and the only thing left to do was wait for a decision that could not be influenced by anything that happened in Kessler Ridge. The town was left alone with itself and its anxiety, and it managed that anxiety in the ways that small communities always have, by doing the ordinary things more deliberately. Ted Croft built the 3 fence posts he had been putting off for 2 seasons, working in the mornings with focused attention, setting each one precisely, tamping the earth down carefully around the base. Bea made bread twice a week instead of once. Dorothy Lundquist baked more than she needed and distributed the extra to 3 neighboring households in quantities that prompted gentle concern about her well-being, which she dismissed. Carl Hayden stood at his window more than usual. Lynn noticed and said nothing about it. She understood what he was looking at. Mara worked her shifts. She spoke with Dolores twice a week, brief calls about logistics and legal details. She did not allow herself to think about what she would feel if the ruling went the other way. That road led nowhere useful, and she needed to be useful. On the 10th day, the ruling appeared in the state court's online filing system at 9 in the morning. Patricia Oakes at the State Land Rights Office saw the new filing first, because she had set up a notification. She called Claire Sutton. Claire read the ruling in 4 minutes and 20 seconds, and called Dolores Fitch. Dolores called Mara. Mara was at the stockyard, at the far end of the feeding run, when her phone rang. She answered it, and Dolores said, "Judge Foss ruled for us." She stopped walking. The cattle moved in the pen beside her, indifferent and steady. "The covenant," she said. "Confirmed enforceable," Dolores said. "The consolidation is barred. The protective trust is ordered. The Dre acquisition bid is legally finished." She stood in the stockyard in the early morning, with the phone at her ear and the cattle moving around her, and she breathed. "There is something else," Dolores said. The ruling includes a judicial note about the 1989 memo. Foss wrote that it raises questions of significant concern regarding the historical handling of conditional deed instruments in this region, and warrants further examination. It is not a fraud finding. That is for the state attorney's office to determine. But it is in a judge's ruling, on the record. That matters, Mara said. It matters for the other towns, Dolores said, for the families there, for everyone who comes after. A pause. Dolores, Mara said. Yes, Dolores said. Thank you for driving 4 hours in the rain to knock on my door. There was a silence on the line, brief but full. Thank you, Dolores said, for having something worth driving to. Her voice, steady through 60 seconds of good news, went very slightly rough at those words. 30 years of something, set down at last. The community ceremony was held on a Saturday afternoon, 3 weeks after the ruling. Gerald Bray organized it, with the methodical care he applied to everything. He chose the East Valley field, the open land between the Croft property and the Voss plot, because it was the right place, the actual land, rather than any building or institution. Nearly 200 people came. That was almost half of Kessler Ridge. They stood in the dry grass with the hills on all sides in the autumn light, some in their good jackets and some in their working clothes, because this was Kessler Ridge, and the working clothes were not a lesser thing. The 6 families stood near the front. Dorothy Lundquist had brought the last flowers of the season from her kitchen garden. Slightly faded, very themselves. B. Croft had brought food to the table at the field's edge. Lynn Hayden held Carl's hand without self-consciousness, and he did not let go. Dolores stood slightly to the side, in the way of people who have done the important work and are comfortable allowing others to receive the recognition of it. Simon Carr was there with his notebook, though he had closed it and put it in his jacket pocket, because today he was just standing with everyone else. Patricia Oakes and Claire Sutton had driven from the state office. Gloria Hearn had sent a written message of congratulations that Gerald read aloud, apologizing that a hearing in another county had kept her away. Mara was at the back of the crowd. She was in the second-hand jacket, the green one that was a size too big. She had considered changing. She had decided not to. Gerald gave a brief address. He acknowledged the families, the state office, the legal and journalistic work that had supported the process. He spoke without excess, which was appropriate for him, and for the occasion. Then he said, "I'd like to invite Mara Voss to say a few words." People turned toward the back. Some began to applaud before she had moved, and the applause grew as she came through the crowd, which opened for her the way it had opened the night she walked to the front of the town hall meeting. She came to the front and faced them. She had written notes. She looked at them for a moment. Then she folded the paper and put it in her pocket. "I want to say thank you to Dolores Fitch," she said, "who drove 4 hours in bad weather to knock on a door she had never knocked on before, because she believed that what was right was worth finding, and because she had been waiting 30 years to help find it." She paused. "I want to thank Simon Carr, who sat on a story he had been carrying for years, because he understood that accuracy mattered more than timing, and that the truth is not well served by being used as a tool before it is ready." She looked at the families. "And I want to thank the 6 families, who stayed on this land, and held on to it, in the years and decades before any of us knew there was something to hold on to, and who kept holding on, when holding on was hard." She looked at the field around her, the hills at all 4 edges, the dry grass under their feet. "This land has never been about money," she said. "It has never been about deed references or acquisition pathways, or any of the language that was used to try to make it seem like a transaction. It is about what we leave for the people who come after us, about whether the things that matter, the small farms, the old fields, the communities that have been here for generations, whether those things are protected, or whether they are consumed by people who see them only as inventory." She stopped. "They are not inventory. This is not inventory. This is a home." She had been speaking for 3 minutes and 12 seconds. She gave it 6 more seconds. "The trust that protects this land carries the name that the families gave it," she said. "I did not choose it. I am grateful for it. I hope I am worthy of it." She looked at the field one more time. "That is all I have to say." She stepped back. The applause was not loud at first. It built slowly, from a few hands, and then became the sound of 200 people in an open field who had been holding something for a long time and were now allowing themselves to let it go. Dorothy Lundquist was crying, which she would deny to any person who mentioned it to her for the rest of her life. Ted Croft made a sound beside B that was not a word, but was the sound of something long carried being set down, at the exact right moment. Carl Hayden looked at Lynn. She looked back at him. The 50 acres were behind them, inside the field where they were standing, part of the trust that now protected all of it, and neither of them said a word. because the words were all behind them now, in the long months of fighting and uncertainty, and what was here was something simpler and quieter than words. At the far edge of the gathering, Pete Lund stood with his hands in his jacket pockets and watched the woman he had worked beside for 3 years. He thought about the hay bales she had been loading when the trucks rolled in. He thought about her voice at the town hall meeting, clear and level and absolutely without urgency. He thought about the plastic bag she had sealed around the first threatening note and photographed methodically in the stockyard parking lot. He thought, she did all of this. He looked at the valley, spreading away from the field in all directions. He looked at it the way you look at something you are seeing clearly for the first time, not because it has changed, but because you finally understand what it is. The Voss Covenant was already on file at the county recorder's office. A deed of protection, a trust instrument, an agreement between people about what mattered and what should be kept. It would be there when everyone standing in this field was gone. That was what it was for. The years after the ruling came the way years come to places like Kessler Ridge, in seasons, in the rhythms of work and weather, without particular drama. Mara worked at the stockyard for 8 more months. She kept the same schedule, the same hours, the same attention to the work that never changed. Pete Lund said once, during that period, that she seemed different since the ceremony. She asked him in what way. He thought about it and said, less concentrated. Like something that had been held very tightly for a long time was not as tight anymore. She said she thought that was probably right. The position at the State Land Rights Office came to her through Patricia Oakes, who called on a Thursday afternoon to say that a junior investigator role had opened in the Rural Land Protection Unit and that Gloria Hearn had personally suggested that Patricia reach out. Mara thought about it for 2 weeks. She considered it at the kitchen table in the mornings and on the drive to the stockyard and in the quiet hours after dinner. The capital was 60 miles from Kessler Ridge. She would not be at the stockyard. She would not be close to her father's land in the daily way that she had always been. She talked to George on the second Sunday. He was on the porch. The afternoon was cooling. Ted Croft's nephew, a young man named Abe who had come back to the valley the previous year and worked 3 days a week helping George with the property, had just fixed the last of the fence posts that had needed replacing. You should go, George said. It's 60 miles, she said. I know how far it is. The farm. Abe is here 3 days a week, he said, and Pete checks in. He looked out at the land. The fence line was solid. The garden was turned over for the winter. Everything was in order. The land isn't going anywhere, he said. That was the whole point, she said. Exactly, he said. So go do the same thing somewhere else. She accepted the position. The State Land Rights Office was not a glamorous place to work. The corridors were beige, the lighting was fluorescent, the work was dense and slow and procedural and required a tolerance for long hours in records rooms and an appetite for reading documents that most people would not read voluntarily. It required patience, precision, and the ability to hold a large amount of complex information in mind at once without letting the threads come loose. Mara was, in the language of her formal performance reviews, exceptional. Within 18 months, she was promoted to senior investigator. Within 3 years, she was leading a team of 4. Her team worked primarily on rural land protection, communities and families under acquisition pressure, properties where the legal record contained protections that the owners did not know were there. She was very good at finding them. The state attorney's investigation into the 1989 filing reorganization and the Dre family's acquisition history across 3 counties took 2.5 years to complete. It was methodical, dense, and careful. It received accurate coverage, rather than dramatic coverage, which suited it. 2 former county officials were found to have engaged in deliberate suppression of conditional deed instruments, in a way that had benefited the Dre family's acquisition activities. One accepted a formal settlement arrangement, the other contested it and, after a lengthy process, was found responsible for professional misconduct. Both were named in the final investigative report, which became a matter of public record. The Dre family's cooperation with the investigation, which Callum had initiated in a phone call to Frank Holden after the private meeting at the diner, proved to be substantive. Gerald and Callum Dre worked with the state attorney's office to trace every acquisition across the 3 Highland counties and identify the ones that conditional instruments would have barred or altered. In 2 cases, those instruments would have blocked the acquisitions entirely. The families who had sold their land in those cases who had left the valley years ago, were located and offered compensation. It was not the land itself. One property had been developed, the other substantially altered. But it was acknowledgement, and it was financial, and both families accepted it, and said so publicly. In the third county, the situation was different. The acquisition there had been planned but not yet completed when the investigation became public. The suppressed conditional instruments from the 1960s were restored to the standard county record. The community kept its land. Callum restructured the Dre family's operations over the 2 years following the investigation's conclusion. He divested the 2 fully acquired Highland properties, selling them not to development interests but to conservation organizations. He moved the family's primary focus to sustainable cattle management on the ranching lands that were clearly and cleanly theirs by undisputed deed. He stepped away from land acquisition entirely. He gave one formal interview to an agriculture industry publication 2 years after the ruling. The interviewer asked him what he had learned from the events in Kessler Ridge. He said, "I spent the first 3 decades of my life believing that the ability to acquire something was the same as the right to acquire it. The events in Kessler Ridge taught me that those 2 things have nothing to do with each other." The interviewer asked him about Mara Voss. He said, "She did not stop me from doing something wrong. She stopped me from continuing to do something wrong, which is harder and rarer. I owe her more than an apology can account for." The interviewer asked if they had spoken since the stockyard. He said, "Once, briefly." The once was true. It had happened at the annual fundraising dinner for the State Land Rights Office, held in the capital to support the Rural Protection Unit's operations. Mara attended as a representative of the office. Callum attended as a donor. He had written a check that was larger than any donation the event had previously received, by a margin that several people at the event noticed and discussed. They spoke for 4 minutes at a table near the wall. He asked how the work was going. She said it was going well. He said he was glad. She thanked him for the donation. He said it was the least he could do. She looked at him for a moment. "It's not the least," she said, "but it's something." He accepted that without argument. They returned to separate sides of the room. That was the last time they spoke at length. The investigation report was published and widely referenced. Few people read it in full, because it was technical and long, and shaped more like a policy document than a story. But its summary section was widely quoted, and the sentence that appeared most often in the coverage, the sentence that ended up in a law journal article 3 years later, the sentence that Patricia Oakes printed and put on her office wall, was the last line of the summary. It read, "The events in Kessler Ridge demonstrate that legal protections for community land interests, once embedded in the public record, cannot be permanently erased by those who would benefit from their absence. They can only be overlooked until someone decides to look." George Voss read the summary on a Friday afternoon, sitting on the porch of the Voss farmhouse in the late autumn light. He had the pages printed from the kitchen printer, and he read them slowly, one line at a time. When he reached the last line, he stopped. He read it again. Then he put the pages in his lap and looked at his land. The fence along the east edge had 3 new posts that Abe had set in the spring, solid and straight. The kitchen garden was finished for the year. The hills beyond the property boundary were brown and steady. The valley spread away in all directions, under a sky that was going soft and golden at the edges. He thought about his daughter. He thought about the kitchen table at midnight. He thought about the county records office 40 minutes away, and the 4 visits she had made without telling anyone. He thought about the evening she had stood in the town hall meeting with a piece of paper and a voice that did not tremble. He thought about the porch where he was sitting, and the land beyond the fence, and the fact that both of them were still there. He picked up the printed pages and went inside. The one interview Mara Voss gave was to a small rural policy magazine that published 4 times a year and focused on land use issues in agricultural communities. The editor had written to her 4 times before she agreed, and she agreed only on the condition that the interview focus on the legal process and its policy implications, rather than on her personally. He agreed to those terms. He kept to them for most of the conversation. At the end, he asked her one personal question. He said, "In the 18 months before the town hall meeting, when you were doing all of that research alone, with no one knowing about it, did you ever doubt whether it was worth it?" She was quiet for a moment. "Every month," she said. "Every single month I would think, maybe I have misread this." Maybe the document means something different from what I think. Maybe even if it means exactly what I think, it will not hold up, or they will find a way around it, or someone will argue that 60 years of silence makes it unenforceable. She paused. But then I would read the document one more time, and it said what it said. And the land was still out there, so I kept going. What kept you going when the doubt was heaviest? He said. She thought about it for a long time. The understanding that nobody else was going to do it, she said. Not because people did not care. People cared very much. But caring about something and having the particular combination of time and stubbornness and access to the county records office that was needed to find the specific thing that would save it, that combination happened to be mine. I had no special training. I had days off. I had the records office and a librarian named Hugh who brought out the historical maps without being asked twice. She stopped. The tool was available to anyone who wanted to use it. I picked it up. That is all. He published the interview the following month. It was the most read piece the magazine had ever produced. He wrote in his own editor's note that it was the best interview he had conducted in 22 years of editing, and that the most remarkable thing about Mara Voss was not what she had done, but how she talked about it, as though it had simply been the next step of an obvious thing, the way you pick up a tool because the work needs doing, and your hand is the one closest to it. The Voss covenant remained in effect. The East Valley land stayed as it was. 6 families, their fields, their fence lines, their farmhouses, their kitchen gardens and working lives, and the irreplaceable specific texture of lives lived on land that had been held and that would be held. The trust that protected it met once a year to review its charter and update its administrative records. Mara attended the meeting every other year when her schedule allowed, because 60 miles was still 60 miles, and the work at the state office was busy and growing. The last line of the trust charter read, "This land is held in common for the benefit of those who live on it, and those who will live on it after them. It is not inventory. It is not an acquisition. It is a home." Mara had written that line. She had submitted it to the charter committee without her name on it, as a suggestion, and they had adopted it unanimously without knowing where it came from. It was in the document now, permanent, part of the legal record of the land. That was how she preferred things. The document was what mattered. The name attached to it was secondary. What a thing said was more important than who had said it. She drove home after the last meeting she attended, the 60 miles of valley road under a dark sky full of stars. She had a new case waiting on her desk at the state office, a community in the next region, a freedom of information request that had come back with irregularities in a set of 1970s deed records. She had read through the initial documents during her lunch break. There was something there, she was not yet sure what. She would need to go to the county records office. She would find the right cabinet, pull the right category, and read it carefully until she understood what it said. She had done this before. She knew how to do it. She knew how long it might take, and that she would have to be patient, and that at some point in the middle of it, probably around the 3rd month, she would doubt whether it was leading anywhere. She drove with both hands on the wheel. The valley road had 2 bad bends that could catch you out if you were not paying attention. She was always paying attention. She took the bends carefully, one at a time, the way she took everything, deliberately, without hurrying, without looking away from what was in front of her. She never let the bends catch her out.